Let's go ahead and just jump into it. What you'll now hear is a May 30th telephone interview with Quebec writer, journalist, and poet Carolyne Van Der Meer, and it centers around her book launched earlier this year called Motherlode. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. Hi, Carolyne. This is Bruce. How are you?
Hi, Bruce. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. All set for the big interview and reading this evening?
I am, thanks.
Cool. Well, you recently, at this point, I know we've been trying to get together. You contacted me actually a few months ago, I believe, about a book you just written, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But I thought the way I usually handle it is, we can mention the book. It's called Motherlode.
Right.
And who's it published by?
It's published by Wilfrid Laurier University Press.
Very good. And when did this launch?
The book came out just before Christmas, and we officially launched it in Montreal on February 27th, and then we launched it in Toronto in early April.
Very cool. How were the launches?
They were very good, actually. In Montreal, we had about 80 people come out.
Wonderful. And
in Toronto, probably about 50 or 60.
That's great.
Both of them turned out very well.
Oh, that sounds really quite nice.
It was a little different in Montreal because it was mostly, my whole network, my whole life here in Montreal. But in Toronto, we launched the book through an organization called the Canadian Association for the Advancement of Netherlandic Study, so an organization concerned with Holland, mostly immigrants actually who lived something similar to what my mother lived. So mostly a group of older people. And they were, interested in the book in a different way because a lot of their experiences were similar. So that was neat because it generated a lot of discussion afterwards, and it was kind of a different atmosphere to the launch.
That's wonderful. Well, two kind of slightly different but very wonderful experiences then, it sounds like.
Very much so.
Yeah. And maybe before we get into it, the only thing I might mention, just as kind of a prelude, is that when I did get the book, I was surprised. I expected it to be almost completely prose, but there is quite a bit of poetry in the book as well.
Yes, actually, the book is, the subtitle of the book is called A Mosaic of Dutch Wartime Experience. So the mosaic refers to the fact that it is a number of different genres within the book. So there are journal entries which document my own sort of search for my mother and her early life. There is poetry, there are short stories, and there are essays.
And I can say I've read the book and I found it quite wonderful.
Well, thank you, Bruce.
I really did.
Wonderful to hear. It was quite a labor of love for me because I should mention that my mother is alive. A lot of people have asked me, did you do this to sort of pay tribute to her, after her life? And my answer, of course, is no. She's right here with me, and she certainly supported the book in every way, and I spent a lot of time interviewing her. The idea behind the book was to kind of discover her legacy, the legacy of her family in Nazi-occupied Holland, and to preserve it. My son, who's now 14, he in the past had asked me a lot of questions about my mother's life during the war, and so it made me think that story should be told.
Exactly.
And so that's where the book, that's the genesis of the book. But, my mom's story, she was 7 years old when the war ended, so she, her memories are somewhat limited.
Yeah.
And that made me want to talk to other people who had similar experiences, but who are a little older than her and who could remember more. So the book is also scattered with stories that other people lived.
Exactly, yes. It's really wonderful, some of those connections that you made there and some of the stories that came from that. Also, your I guess you would call the essay portion of the book and the poetry as well. You're sitting perhaps in a cafe someplace just observing and taking present day in and trying to reflect on everything that might have happened, and also the stories that you'd been told.
Exactly. It is a book of reflection. It's also a book of kind of, the title says it all. When I chose the title Motherlode, there's obviously a play there about my mother, but the notion of finding the motherlode, or finding the gold nuggets, and my search was really to discover my mother's character, but also to hang on to the things that these people lived during a very difficult time, and I think that, there's certainly so many books written about World War II, but sometimes I think the everyday is forgotten. The things that people living in these occupied countries had to endure. There's not much talk of that. There's talk of historical events and wartime strategy, etc. But the things that people had to just live through every day, these are quite powerful.
They are, and as you said too, in most accounts of wars in general, or that one in particular, and all of that human element is kind of glazed over, and you don't really get to feel it. You just get to read it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I really tried to capture that through the different genres in the book.
And I thought you did an incredible job again. Just out of curiosity, has your mother read the book? I'm sure she has.
Yes, she has. I didn't let her read it until I knew that the publisher was going to take it on. I didn't want to give her any false hopes and show her a manuscript that wasn't actually going to come into being. So once I found out from Wilfrid Laurier University Press that they were going to publish it, I let my mother read it, and she was quite. She sent me a letter in the days that followed her reading of it, and she said that it kept her up for a few nights afterward.
Is that right?
And she said. She wrote me a letter to tell me this, and she said that she wasn't telling me that to upset me, because she knows I don't want her to, not have any sleep. She said, I'm telling you that to make you realize what an effect it had on me, which was a great compliment. I was very pleased that she felt that way, that I was able to capture what she went through.
And it was, did she read, just out of curiosity, this is kind of an aside, I guess, in a way, but I know there was one place where what she gave you as a street address, or you acquired as a street address, of a house she lived in, that street had actually changed its numbers.
Exactly.
And did she confirm, or what, I don't really know what the right word is, that was a possibility, or that you did actually find the right house that was actually a different number?
Yes, I found the right house with a different number, and I'd seen pictures of this house, all the way through my childhood, so I knew exactly which house it would be based on that, and it was the only house along the canal that looked like that. So it wasn't, it was no mystery in that sense, but it was a little bit sort of unsettling to think, okay, did I make a mistake? What's going on here? And of course, when I went to the house, the owner was home, and lucky for me, he was fluent in English. In that part of Holland, which is very, very close, it's about 5 kilometers from the German border. This little village is very Dutch. Like when you're in Amsterdam and the larger cities, everybody speaks English. You don't need to speak a word of Dutch. But in this little town, really nobody spoke English. And this guy who owned my mother's house, he was actually had been born in Canada.
Quite serendipitous, eh?
That's funny, eh? So anyway, I had a very long conversation with him. It was a great thing that he was home. Had it just been his wife and kids, I wouldn't have had the same discussion at all, because they were unilingually Dutch. But I spent a few hours there, and I was able to see the house and sort of really get a sense of where my mother had lived. And it was quite, it was quite, I can't even really find the right word. It was, you hear something all your life, and then you actually see it with your own eyes. It's really kind of, not unsettling in a bad way, but sort of unbelievable almost. It's like, wow, I'm really here. This is really real. It's not just images anymore. I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe perhaps almost a bit surreal, or I don't know.
That's good word. That's kind of what it felt like.
Yeah. to kind of be in the midst of everything that were just a few words and maybe ideas or maybe little tiny images in your head of what it would be like at one point.
Yep.
Wonderful. And when did you get the idea to do this? I mean, you kind of said, but in a time frame.
Well, I started. I've been thinking about it for quite a long time, and in 2010, I started really thinking, okay, I want to write a book. What should I write about? This seemed to me the best place to enter that world of writing books, and so I started generating ideas in 2010, and then I went to the Netherlands that summer, and I really started, pushing myself to pull the pieces together. And then I decided to do a creative writing program at the Humber School for Writers in Toronto, and I worked with a mentor. Her name is Olive Senior. She's a well-known poet, and so the program at the Humber School for Writers is actually a correspondence program where you work with one mentor to bring a manuscript to completion. So I started that in early 2011, and I finished at the end of that year, I guess in the late fall. So the manuscript was completed in late 2011, and I submitted it to Wilfrid Laurier University Press in the following January, so January 2012. And then in the fall, I found out it was being published. So it took 2 years to really write it, and 10 months of waiting to find out if it would be published, and then an entire year to produce the book.
Yeah. Which seems like a long time, but really I think in the realm of, and especially getting a first book out, I think that's quite quick.
I think so too. I think that I was very fortunate. Wilfrid Laurier University Press is a wonderful publisher. They've been very good to me. And they were, I think a lot of publishers don't respond that quickly.
Yeah.
And, to have had an answer within 10 months of my submitting the book was actually pretty quick.
That's good. Well, it's a wonderful book, and it's just nice to know that you had a beautiful experience bringing it into fruition.
I did, and my mother's reaction to it upon publication was, I had copies just prior to last Christmas, so I was able to give her a copy at Christmas, and she was delighted, and it was really great to see that, it was, kind of drew our family together in a very special way.
Oh, that's wonderful. And maybe in a few minutes, I don't know, I've just told you that you could read pretty much whatever you wanted. Maybe we're going to hear something
Absolutely.
from the book, maybe something else as well, or in place of. But before we get into that, because this was a mosaic, and obviously you have talent in a number of different genres, and I think I know that you are a journalist as well.
Yes.
Somebody asks you what you do, what do you do? What do you say? Do you say I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, or do you?
I guess what I typically say, because I do work full time as a public relations person. So I guess what I say is that I say I work in PR, and I say that I'm a writer. So I guess that kind of covers it.
That does.
I've spent many years working as a journalist kind of on the side, and I never quite give that little part of my life up. And it did really come in handy when I was writing this book, because I interviewed a lot of people, and that interviewing ability was a blessing.
Yeah, I'm sure. It allowed you to get a lot more information than you might not have been allowed to.
Absolutely.
To have obtained had you not known how to approach people and the questions to ask and how to pursue.
For sure.
Cool.
But in answer to your question about reading, I think I would read from the book more than anything else, and I thought that I would stick to the poetry just because it's easier to just. I think it's easier, given this is a radio interview, it's probably easier to just do a number of short pieces. What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, I think short pieces, and and again, I've given you the liberty to choose whatever you want, so if you want to include some short prose pieces as well. Just a couple other general questions, though, before we get into that.
Absolutely.
Is that okay? when did you? You say a journalist on the side, so I'm assuming a writer on the side. When did you first think that you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, I was probably. I was a kid, like a little kid.
Ah, that's cool.
I was always walking around with a notebook and with, often quotes and poems by others, and then I started to jot my own things down. But I didn't really think of myself as a creative writer until probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Is that right?
I sort of dabbled in writing poetry and short stories and things, but I never actively pursued getting any of it published.
I see. Yeah.
However, I've been working as a journalist since probably the late 80s.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So that's always been a part of my life, but the creative aspect came along a little later.
I understand. Do you recognize a difference in where your journalistic writing comes from as compared to where your poetry comes from? You're shorting out a little bit, Bruce.
Okay. I missed that one.
Okay. Well, it's kind of a not really well-worded question to begin with, so maybe I'll try it a little bit better this way, too, and get a little bit closer to the phone. Is there a place inside you, say, that it's different between where you write from as, a journalist or even a prose writer as opposed to something in you that you draw from when you write poetry?
Oh, I think so. It's a very different headspace.
Yeah.
I think when I'm writing a journalistic piece, I'm thinking about my reader.
Uh-huh.
And when I'm writing a poem, I'm thinking about the genesis of the poem. Like, I'm thinking about whatever it is that's inspired me, and I don't know how it's going to turn out when I begin.
Wonderful.
And I think you can probably relate to what I'm saying, given that you're a poet as well.
Uh-huh.
When I'm writing a journalistic piece, I have a goal.
Uh-huh.
I need to cover a certain thing. But when I'm writing a piece of poetry, I don't have a goal. It's just whatever comes out, kind of.
Wonderful.
Does that make sense?
No, totally makes sense. Yes, it really does. Very cool. That's a question I usually ask people that write from a number of genres, and usually get not always the same response, but usually yes, that there is a difference. So, very cool. Well, how about hearing a little bit from Motherlode?
Okay. Now, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to explain each piece before I read a little bit?
Again, that's up to you. I'm one of the... some people like to give a little preface to their poems. Some poets do, and others just completely just don't. So whatever you feel more comfortable with, actually.
Okay, so I guess I'll preface each one with just a brief explanation.
Cool. And probably in this case, coming from a book that's this covers such a diverse number of reflections and places, it's probably really a good thing that you are doing that. So very cool.
Okay. Do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay, the first piece I'll read is called Letters from a War Child, and this is written from my mother. The letters are like a run-on sentence, words, emotions, spilling from my mother as though they will get away from her if she doesn't hurry. She glosses over the ugly parts of the war, claiming a faulty memory, but remembers with candid detail the things that brought her joy. Flowers in her small garden, her father's aviary, homegrown honey, the fairy story elements of her young life. Today she only watches movies with happy endings, reads romance novels that turn out right. No war films or documentaries. The hiss-bang of dropping bombs, the frantic pitch of air raid sirens send her diving for cover. I wonder at this denial, chase her sentences as they run underground, mine them for all that got left behind, for all that she does not want to find.
Wonderful poem.
Thank you. The next one I'll read is called, hang on, let me just find my page here. This is called The Librarian, and this is about my research in Holland, and it's about the librarian that I spoke to at the Jewish Historical Museum, and actually she was a big help to me. Her name was Anat Harrell, and she was very interested in my project, and this is a bit about my exchanges with her. The librarian. In heavily accented English, she tells me over coffee that some Dutch citizens made Jews pay to be hidden during the war. I don't want to believe her, but I know her shelves and cabinets of documentation must hold some truth. She is insistent. She is Dutch herself, speaking the wrongs of her own people. I hold tight to my family's Christian values of helping the hunted, take refuge in the fact that they never exacted such payment. Months later, I will learn that the Dutch boasted a higher rate of turning in Jews than any other occupied country. Now, when I dip speculoos into my coffee, anticipating the melting morsels on my tongue, they disintegrate, crumbs sinking to the bottom of the cup, like sediment.
Wonderful.
Okay, sorry about that. There was a little interruption there.
It's okay.
The next one is called Motherlode, and this is about my mother's house. Motherlode, Hoofweg 102, De Krim, Overijssel. Flatlands, farm country, waterways, tree lines. Train speeding me back in time to this quiet village, barely awake. I walk along the dike, thinking of the boy who stuck his finger in. Legend, like my mother's house, until today. Its facade, triangular with two windows upstairs, two larger ones at ground level, looks like a face with wide eyes and a large mouth, expressions and words, stories to tell. Once a butchery and a shoemaking shop, now home to a family of 6. Front room divided by need, PlayStation and TV on one side, hearth and soft leather sofas on the other. No trace of her life, no visible false ceiling, no frame around untold stories.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Bruce. This next one is called The Hunger Winter, 1944 to 1945, and it's about my grandfather. Actually, it's about my mother nursing my grandfather, so her father, when he came home from fighting in the resistance. The Hunger Winter, 1944 to 1945. I remember my small hands pulling up his covers, being startled by his raspy breath coming from a mouth, a face I didn't recognize. My father was oh so thin. I must have been 6 when I saw him there on the divan in the living room, bright light filtering in, scattering on a hollow face. I remember Mama offering thin soups made of vegetables from jars in the cellar, from potatoes she had hidden under straw. We had just enough, but he and his fellow resistance fighters ate tulip bulbs, toxins from their onion-like centers coursing through their bodies covered in skin and bone, bodies fighting 2 wars. After that, tulips never looked the same to me.
No, I really like that.
And the next is called... This is called Stimpy Stampy at the New Dorius. And Stimpy Stampy is that restaurant's name for a dish. In Dutch it's called boerenkool, and we called it farmer's cabbage at home. But it's about my tasting this dish in Holland and recalling eating it when I was a kid. Stimpy Stampy at the New Dorius. This, in what's billed as fresh Dutch cuisine, is more refined. Potatoes, kale, back bacon, pearl onions with rich gravy, meatballs served with spicy Dutch mustard from Zaandam. Goes up my nose, tells me it's real. Here and now, not quite the boerenkool my mother used to make. We called it farmer's cabbage, peasant's dish, kale, cooked soft, mixed with mashed potatoes and sausages, swimming in a velvet gravy that slid over the tongue. I know now she was recreating home when she made it, fueled by nostalgia, dislocation, trying to give us what she was missing.
Very cool.
Thank you. This next one is actually not about my mother. It's about another woman that I interviewed. Her name is Libby Bolin. And this was about her story as a little girl and the things that she would see and hear, and basically that she was told never to speak of it. It's called No Visible Injury. They kept telling her to be quiet. Shh. They'd put a finger to their lips. Don't talk about this. You didn't see that. She went through her childhood in a whisper, or with no voice at all. Saw no Onderdikers, saw no Jews, told no lies, hid nothing, stole nothing, was nothing.
Ah.
And I should explain that the word Onderdiker refers to the Dutch resistance fighters who were helping the Jews hide.
Okay.
It is the notion of going into hiding. The next piece I'm going to read for you is called Manna from Heaven. This is actually inspired by someone who lives in Dublin, actually a Dutch person living in Dublin in Ireland, whose grandparents wrote a letter basically about their situation. They wrote this letter to other members of the family, and the gentleman who let me use the letter to inspire a poem, his name is Pierre Kuipers. He put this letter on his blog, and I sort of found my way to it and used the letter to inspire this poem, which is called Manna from Heaven. Today, margarine fell from Allied plains. Last week, we got 100 grams of oil and 2 kilograms of barley flakes from the Jansens, a tin of milk from the Vissers, and half a loaf of dark bread from the Altinas. Just last night, Marianus brought 2 kilograms of barley and Cass another kilogram of oatmeal. Bitter when we mix it, but we get a good-sized pancake. With the borrowed milk, we got to have a nice cup of coffee substitute last Sunday. There's been an outbreak of typhus. Some suffer from hunger edema, but us, we are managing. And the last one I'll read for you is called Hommage to a Canadian Soldier, and this one has quite a story behind it. I interviewed a gentleman named David Kusser. David Kusser is not Dutch. He's a Jewish man who was a Canadian soldier during World War II, and he actually worked during the liberation period in Holland. He was billeted in Holland, and he did occupation duty in Germany after the war. He had a very unique perspective because he's Jewish. And when I interviewed him, he was 87 when I interviewed him, so he's well over 90 now. And it was quite an experience to talk to this man because a lot of what he had to tell me, he told no one else. He'd been carrying this weight with him for many, many years. And this is actually sort of an interesting story about writing Motherlode, and that is that many of the people that I talked to, including my mom, had not really ever talked about any of their experiences. They'd kind of swept them under the rug. Mm-hmm. They wanted to basically forget everything and just assimilate into their new lives as Canadians. In the case of David Kusser, it was such a traumatizing experience for him that he just didn't ever want to talk about it again. And so I spent several hours with him, interviewing him, and it was emotional. It was a relationship of trust from the very outset. When he had no reason to really trust me, he didn't know me at all. But perhaps it was easier for him to tell a stranger than it was to tell his family.
Wow, that's a beautiful story in itself.
It's quite. I made some really strong connections with the people that I spoke to, and that was one of the blessings that came out of Motherlode. It wasn't just what it did for my relationship with my mother. It was all of these other connections that came about because of it, which have really marked me, and I guess marked those people as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So I guess we never realize when we take on a project like this what the results are going to be.
And the reciprocal results, it works both ways, as you've already kind of mentioned.
For sure.
Wonderful.
So this is called Homage to a Canadian Soldier, and it's for David Kusser. A gun repairman with a French-Canadian regiment, he was essential. Spoke English, French, Yiddish, German, and soon enough, Dutch. Now he speaks quietly, deliberately. There are long silences as he gathers, resees, reviews. The memories are neatly filed. He pulls them out, one by one, like stark black and white prints, etched there in his mind. He gives them to me without prejudice, tells me about the desecrated synagogues, the farm animals, their bellies bloated to 2-3 times their size with malnutrition, blown up by German soldiers for fun. The Polish labor camp he found near Wilshoven during occupation duty in Germany. Acrid smell of death in his nostrils. 300 mare skeletons greeting his regiment, left for dead among rotting corpses at the end of the war. So many Jewish Canadian soldiers went because they had to find and kill that bastard, he said. The rage is raw again, but the years have dampened it. He takes the stark black and white images, stacks them neatly, folds them into memory. His eyes glitter, maybe with tears, or maybe just watering with age.
Ah, beautiful poem.
Thank you. So that's a selection from the book, and I hope that will, incite some of your listeners to go have a look at it.
For sure. And as you mentioned that, I was going to anyway. Where can anybody get a copy of the book?
Sorry, you're shorting out on me again, Bruce.
Okay, sorry. Where can people get a copy of the book?
They can get it at Chapters. They can get it off of Amazon or order online through Chapters. They can order directly from the publisher as well.
Cool.
So it's easy to find, and perhaps some independent booksellers in Kingston may carry it.
Wonderful. And the publisher was Wilfrid Laurier Press, right?
Right.
Very wonderful, and people can find that online, so that's easy enough. And is there anything else you wanted to mention, or?
I don't know. I think I've kind of covered the story.
Yeah.
Like I said in just a minute ago, the real beauty of writing this book, or the unexpected Motherlode for me, was the relationships that I developed through it, and it's made it, a very particular and rich experience. Ah,
yes. And it shows in the book as well. So.
Oh, thank you.
And it's been a pleasure talking to you, and though I'd read those poems in myself, it's always wonderful to hear poetry, spoken poetry, especially in the poet's voice. So thank you so much for this.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Have a great rest of the weekend, Carolyne.
Thanks, Bruce. You too.
Perfect, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you. Thanks for everything.
You bet.
Have a good night.
You too. Thank you. And you just heard a telephone conversation, interview and reading with Carolyne Van Der Meer, Van Der Meer, I should say, with, again, attention mostly, just about the whole thing was centered around her book called Motherlode, again published by the Wilfrid Laurier University Press. And again, it's a wonderful book. Much thanks to her for a very pleasant interview and reading as well.